Hello and welcome to the Management Matters podcast by the University of Liverpool Management School. I'm Hazel Kennedy, and for this episode I'm delighted to be joined by Dr Salma Raheem, lecturer in HR Management and Organisational Behaviour at the Management School. Together we'll be discussing leadership for the modern world of work. So let's begin. Welcome, Salma. Lovely to have you here on the podcast. We're talking about leading for a new world of work. This is your research area. So what is it that interests you and why did you get into this particular area? And, what's your background that's maybe led into this life of academia?
Well, thank you for having me on, Hazel. It's a pleasure to be here. And that's like the best question I can get at the start because I didn't actually come into academia in the beginning. I worked in the Middle East and in India prior to coming into academia. I worked in the healthcare sector and I also worked in consulting. But even prior to that, I was born and brought up in the Middle East to South Indian parents. And I studied in international schools, which were primarily run by Americans. My classroom at one point when I was in school had more nations represented by students than we had at the UN at that time.
Wow.
So diversity for me has been the most normal thing possible. I grew up with the idea of people holding multiple perspectives, and there's so many different ways to do the same thing. And getting to the goal there's joy in exploring different ways to getting to whatever goal that we had to achieve. And, as childhood can be quite idealistic. Leaving Saudi Arabia and leaving my time in the Middle East and then having to travel back to settle down in South India, where my parents are from, was a huge cultural shock to go home. I couldn't understand why we do things only one way and why we couldn't explore different opinions or different ideas. And where did these kind of one-sided, homogeneous thinking come from? And I really struggled with that throughout my entire time. And I realized that the joy of being multicultural and being in multicultural spaces was something I actually wanted to share with others. And as I got into the work world and I ended up working back again in the Middle East, but also with people from different backgrounds. At one point, I was a team lead for a group of people that represented about 7 different countries. And I remember our group meetings used to be almost comedy level because, different cultures take their ideas of authority and what leadership is very different. There's 7 different ways of speaking English when you have people from different countries. Some languages, some cultures don't have, for example, a future tense. And so how you explain an instruction or explain the rationale behind a decision, you've got to be really creative in how to get that point across and to get everybody to understand on what we're trying to do and how we want to do it. And then also have the ability to address all of their different concerns because they're coming at it from different perspectives. So I loved that job.
It sounds like it.
I really liked the idea that people would ask what I thought was quite interesting questions because it would be moments of learning for me where I'd be like, I never thought about it that way. That was, I'm not quite sure how we're going to deal with that. Any ideas, anybody? And in that sense, it was quite collaborative. It was quite a learning atmosphere. I was the only person that was given that level of diversity in a particular team. And what I realized I was doing was I was being quite inclusive in my leadership without even knowing that I was doing it. So these kinds of the background that I had and these kinds of background experiences led me to kind of explore what is it to be, why isn't this not the norm to begin with? And then when I pursued a PhD, I actually wanted to do it in the area of multiculturalism, but I took that at the societal level. And Theresa May was the prime minister at that time. And she once said, if you're from something on the lines of, if you're not from someplace, you're from nowhere. In the sense that if you didn't belong to a nation state or if you didn't have one single identity, then you were from nowhere. And things like David Cameron saying multiculturalism is dead. And I'm like, what are they talking about? That's not how the rest of the planet is operating.
No, and not your lived experience either.
Not at all.
No.
Not just mine, but all the people who studied along with me and worked along with me. Our experiences were so different. So I started a PhD with that interest to explore why there's such different ways of looking at it. And then, that's how I got into the whole world of HR and OB.
Fantastic. And you can really see your passion come through when you talk about it. Obviously, you've had that experience yourself as leading a team of, multicultural people. So I'm interested in what's your take on, the difference between sort of leadership in that aspect and maybe managing the team. So to me, leadership is more about sharing a vision of where things are traveling, the direction of travel. This is what we're aiming for. But then empowering, encouraging, nurturing your team, for them to find their own way to achieve that. Whereas for me, management's a bit more task-driven, possibly. So interested to get your take on how you see that.
I completely agree with the definitions and the kind of concepts you're working with. But I think now leadership is a lot more. And I think one of the challenges that I've had, going from a more global space and coming to the UK is that our ideas of what leadership is within the business spaces here needs to kind of evolve. It needs to be a lot more global in its thinking, because we really need to move away from the idea that we need to control and manage people. Mm-hmm. People are a lot more global in their thinking, actually. Post the Me Too movement, post Black Lives Matter, things have come a long way. And post-COVID, people want to find meaning in work. People want to find joy in work. People want a good reason to come to work other than just to pay the mortgage, especially if they want to give at work and contribute. We've got to really move away from the idea of managerial, supervisorial, micromanaging kind of things. Managers have to have leadership qualities, which include facilitating, supporting, growing. There needs to be a learning environment. And a huge part of these things is about being inclusive. So having an inclusive mindset is a critical component of leadership today. It's not just about a vision. It's not just about a vision, but it's also about how are we going to make sure that vision and that way of doing things is as inclusive as possible, because one person's vision is not going to cut it. There are diverse spaces. There are diverse people within a particular organization, and they will have different perspectives. So this one vision it's not going to make it anymore. People have diverse needs. If you look at the UK as a whole, we're about 80% white, and there's almost 20%, 82% white, and there's a 17% of our population in England and Wales, which is non-white. So this is going to be a growing number, and it's just going to keep increasing. But if you look at, say, other Western contexts like the US, 75% is white and 25% is non-white backgrounds. So you're going to have an increasing number of people coming into the workforce with very different needs. And so leaders today, and I would say those even in managerial positions, need to have those kinds of leadership qualities that can be inclusive of different ways of doing things. I think a big part that needs to change is the sense that leaders have to have all the answers all the time. Mm. The ability to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. Yep. Or I don't know, let's find out together. Or I don't know, what do you think? Is a critical part of being a leader. You cannot have all the answers in today's business world. And anyone who's claiming that they know everything, I don't think is humble enough to be a very effective leader.
Sure, completely agree. It's interesting that then, and how then leadership has sort of changed. So considering leadership now and what sort of leaders we need in the future, what's the difference, and how do we get from A to B? How do we get to that future state of leadership?
There is no such thing as a leader being a static human being anymore. So we've got to remember that organizations don't work in silos. They work within the larger context of the economic, social, political situation. And so the people, therefore, that come into organizations and work in organizations are also influenced by the social, political, economic situations they're in. They may be parents. They may be, balancing childcare. They, especially in today's world, they may be also balancing elderly care. There are financial constraints. There are health issues. So when people come into work, it's not that they leave all their problems at the door. Neither do leaders leave their problems at the door, right? We're all full human beings. It's not that we suddenly become professional and suddenly all other problems stop and we only focus at work. So leaders today need to take that into consideration and remember structural inequalities, economic inequalities, political situations are part and parcel of the mindsets and the motivations that people bring into work. So if leaders are not empathetic to the situation that their employees are going through, if leaders have no knowledge of the lived experiences of their team members and their employees, then they're going to really struggle. In turn, if you're working with a team of people who are, globally oriented, or there's a global workforce, or you're looking to be international, then I would definitely consider cultural intelligence as well. The last thing, irrespective of where you're working, is the flexibility to change. Because it's a very dynamic world, a lot of times you can't stick to procedures and policies because that's the way we've always done it around here. Leaders need to be a lot more comfortable with change and thinking on their feet and having therefore some sort of core principles that allow them to be flexible around the needs of their people. I think without that level of dynamism within an individual, you can't really be a leader for today, or you're going to really struggle with those kinds of changes.
It's interesting that you were talking about some of the perhaps more skills-based things. So you spoke about cultural intelligence. So I'm just wondering, obviously, we think of leaders as having a set of skills, but maybe also having a set of behaviours as well. Are there any sort of common behaviours that successful leaders of global workforces have, and what would they be?
So the literature and the research would suggest cultural agility, the ability to change your behavior or adapt your behavior to the cultural context that you're in. From a lot of the research that I look at, there's a level of humility that leaders need, especially in terms of being able to say what they don't know and to admit to it. I also find in my own research that the ability to make sure that people have a sense of fairness and justice is really important. So in the research that I do, I find that perceptions of discrimination are more than sufficient to create real problems in team dynamics. And a leader takes a lot of responsibility for the climate that they create within their working teams. So if people feel that they're perceived to be treated differently, it's one of the core indicators that there's going to be a lot of team conflict, relationship conflict, process conflict, and then team cohesion drops dramatically. So in terms of skills and behaviors, a lot of flexibility is required, but I think this ability to grow and learn and be very open to the fact that you are not going to know everything that's needed, and that's okay.
Yeah.
The ability to say and acknowledge, and so some level of self-reflection, that leadership it's quite a lot of a continuous learning journey. There's a lot you're going to have to learn to be as good as a leader as possible. That openness and humility is fundamental in all of the research that's out there.
That's really interesting, because thinking about the people who are leaders in organisations, I mean, obviously, presumably they've been promoted through ability and performance, but actually, who does get to lead? Who gets to be the leaders? And how do we make sure that it's not just about performance in terms of, we've met our KPIs, tick, therefore I can be a leader. There seems to be a lot more nuance required, and maybe that's something that needs to be brought in thinking about succession planning for future leaders. Have you got any view on that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research in that area as well. Yeah. So that's a really important question, because a lot of times we promote people because they can be good at the particular task at hand. So if I put it in a very simple way, think about people flipping burgers at a McD, for example. Who gets to be the supervisor, the person who's done it the best? Does that mean they know anything about the people around them, or how to motivate them, or how to help them, or facilitate them? or look into their needs? No, not necessarily. So a lot of our promotion criteria must have the element of how do the employees feel about this person's leadership, and that willingness to be open, 360-degree feedback, that can be used as developmental things. They don't need to be judgmental in any way, right? So that, I think, is a critical component of who should be given leadership positions. If they're unable to understand the needs of their employees, you are going to run into a problem down the line at some point as an organization. And unfortunately, we have one too many toxic people in leadership roles. This is not a sustainable way to work. Talent will leave. Whatever mortgage they have to pay, they will leave. And it's a very global environment. People leave countries. It's not, they may have family at some point, at home somewhere, but really good talent will leave to wherever they feel comfortable working. So leaders ensuring that there are working atmosphere, the climate, the culture within each team is conducive, is healthy, is one that facilitates that genuinely people want to show up to work. This is critical for any successful leader for today.
Yeah. I think we've spoken a lot about the sort of elements to make people feel included and positive leadership to really nurture people. I think a lot of what we're sort of describing here is an element of psychological safety within a team for the leader, maybe for the staff within them, that they feel it's okay to make a mistake. And I'll be supported as long as, I learn from it and as long as we fix it for next time. So is that an aspect of leadership, sort of supporting that psychological safety? Is that more important with multicultural teams, or equally or less so?
So this is where we have a lot to learn from other parts of the world. If you look at India as an example, every single state, they speak a different language. They have different cultures, they have different customs, clothes are different, food is different. So if you have to lead a team in India, can you imagine the level of diversity you have to be extremely comfortable with, right? Psychological safety is like something they did 100 years ago, so to speak, right? It's in the past. We've got to get way beyond psychological safety. It's not enough that people have an opportunity to voice and feel that they won't get backlash. What is the point of voicing if it's not taken into the decision-making space? Right? People are going to get fed up. So psychological safety, I feel like, is one of the sort of a given, though that's a decent place to work, that you should be allowed to voice. Feedback should be sought. How else? We're not machines in an assembly line. We are people at work. Obviously, we use our brains and we come in, we have ideas, we want to contribute. Or when there's a problem, we want to be able to say there's a problem. If after being, quote, and nobody should be allowed, it should be normal to be able to speak up and say something. But once something is said, then what? This is why I'm saying post-COVID, people have changed their attitudes quite a lot to work. They want work to be meaningful. So once they've contributed, they've said something, people want to see change. And if that's not being taken into consideration, if it's not being acted upon, if no feedback is given to these suggestions or concerns that are being raised, and if they're not sensible and logical, people are going to disengage. And this is why you have things like quiet quitting, where people are just sitting in the back and doing the bare minimum because they know no one cares here. If no one really cares about what I'm contributing, that I exist, that I brought my brains to work, then what's the point? Right? So if you're truly trying to be conclusion is a business strategy. It's a way of working. It's the way you develop your processes and the way you take decisions in a firm. So inclusion has to include things like, where is decision making happening? Who's able to be accountable for these decisions? Whose voices are not just being heard, but how are they being acted upon? If you really want to know how when I look at an organization, I want to see, not just psychological safety, but how is this percolating upwards? You go beyond the entry level, maybe 2-3 years, and then you see the level of diversity in decision-making levels. And you'll notice it completely patterns out for most organizations. So then it's a bit of an eyewash. It's you're just ticking some box somewhere to say we're diverse, and I don't know, you've got the hijabi picture on the, on the website. Really, that's all passé. We're done with that. Organizations really, really need to move on from that point, because no one's going to be pretending. I mean, we can see, employees can see what's going on and they will call it out. So I think this is really, it's beyond psychological safety at this point.
Yeah. You mentioned the almost, sort of ticking the diversity box there. We've done our bit. We're a modern organisation, but interesting then to think about sort of more the inclusion and the equity. So while some people think, yes, we're diverse, actually that's not enough. It is especially the inclusion and the equity of the people in that organisation that leaders need to focus on. Thinking about that then, and then you also mentioned, a very important word for any organisation, which is change. So leading change, cultural change, to move towards this idea of being inclusive and equitable. How can people navigate that? That's a huge area. Where do you start to eat the elephant with that almost?
I would flip that question around and ask, what's the problem?
Yeah.
What really is the problem? What are leaders scared of? What is wrong if you have someone who doesn't look like you in a position to take decisions about your work? So I think a lot of times there's a lot of ungrounded fear. And I don't think people are, I want to say, honest with themselves to admit that there may be some kind of fear of some sort of unknown. And I think this is where reflexivity really makes a difference. There's like implicit association tests that you can do online, for example. There's so many ways to understand where your biases or assumptions come from. I have a simple question that I ask leaders. So I asked them to sit down and write down, answer 3 simple questions, and they write down names. So the first one being, who's your trusted set of friends? Who are the people you go to and have your back? Write those names down. And then the second question I ask is, who do you go for professional advice? If you're seeking some information, you're seeking some advice, who are the people you go to? And then the third question I ask is, who do you spend time with to have fun? Go out for a movie, go bowling, I don't know, go fishing, whatever it might be. And of course, some names go across all 3 questions, some names don't. But then I'm not interested in the names. I want you to then look at those names and ask yourselves, how many of those people are from different social groups, different ethnic groups, different races? And oftentimes what happens is that's when people realize, I don't even mix with people who are different from myself. I don't know anything about people who look different from me. I mean, how many differently abled friends do I have? Is there anybody there that's from my professional network that I can learn from? And oftentimes the groups of people that we interact with are so homogenous. There's no way we're going to know about other people that are not like us. And that works across all communities, right? Every single community. There's a sense of safety that comes from being comfortable in homophily by knowing people who look like you. But there's also a lot of joy and a lot of wonder and a lot of interesting things in working with people who are nothing like you. So step out of that comfort zone. Go meet new people. Go have fun. You'll find that there's so many interesting things out there. And I think leaders who can do that will not have a problem with coming up with effective inclusion strategies, because they'll know from their own experiences how meaningful and how constructive and how effective that can possibly be in the space of work. I think there's a resistance that comes from the fear of an unknown. I think there's worries that, they don't know how to help or don't know how to handle or won't know how to lead. But my point is very simple. These are easily fixed. Take a little bit of a trouble to read a book from a different part of the world, for example, or watch a foreign film, or meet people from different parts of the world. They're right there in your neighborhood. It's not easy to find them. I mean, it's not that difficult to find them. It's quite easy to do. So why not try it out? I don't think there's really any challenges in that sense. I think people just need to accept that they need to change their outlook. And I don't think I think once they realize how much of joy there is in it and how much it's great for your own improvement, your own quality of life, people will do that a lot more easier, if that makes any sense.
It absolutely does make sense. So I suppose then, thinking about that, if there is this fear that some leaders have, what is it then that they need support with? How can leaders be supported to, do better at engaging with more diverse people in their teams?
So one of the things that research suggests is from contact theory is you meet people from other parts of the world or other communities on an equal footing. So I don't know, they used to have in the past company games, where you play football together or you have a charity thing together. So do things that are bringing people together for a common base where there's an equal status and power. That's critical. That, when the CEO comes in, when the team lead comes in, they're playing alongside, say, somebody who is working in the janitorial role. Like, it's football at the end of the day. It's the person who can kick the ball, right? So there are fun activities that can be organized where there's more opportunity for contact. When there's a lot of working from home, then there needs to be more opportunities where people can come to office to meet and socialize with one another, not necessarily sit in for a meeting. So people get to know one another. These are two easy ways to bring people together to get to know one another. There are more formal structures like reverse mentoring. So a senior person then spends time shadowing someone who's doing other work, right? So to understand what their daily work looks like, what are the kind of tasks they need to do, what are the pressures they face. So for example, I'm an academic, I teach. So it'd be great if someone senior came and stood in the classroom and taught, try to do the same job that I'm trying to do. Maybe the VC comes in and tries to teach the subject. I wonder what they would learn, But there are formal mechanisms like reverse mentoring, for example. Trying to get into someone else's shoes and live their life a little bit is a very safe and easy way to do this. And there's lots of opportunities you can create that within your organization, depending on the kind of work that you're doing. These are just a couple of very simple ones. But socially, I think another way, probably another formal thing is where you do evaluations where, that's a component of the leadership evaluation. How much of time you have spent, what have you learned from other communities, some sort of reflexive, something to demonstrate some evidence that they have learned something new from working with other communities. Or when I say other communities, a community that's not of your own. Yeah. It could be any other community. So, what else have they done to demonstrate that they understand the experiences of their employees? These are not idealistic things. They're simple things, which actually can be done quite easily. So I don't want anybody thinking, who's listening to the podcast to think, oh my God, I've got to come up with a new scheme or something. No, I just bring the humanness back into work. And I think that will really help and make things very simple.
Yeah. You mentioned there about leaders learning, which I think is a lovely thing, because we've had the conversation before that leadership is actually learnable. You can learn these things. Nobody's born to be a leader from day one. You can pick things up. You can use resources to help yourself. So where should people go if they're interested in this and they want to find out more and they want to hone their leadership skills? What sort of things could they do to find out for themselves?
The quick and easy answer to that is come to the University of Liverpool Management School.
Of course.
The longer answer is identify what you want to learn.
Yeah.
Right. So be honest with yourselves. As a leader, come on, there's no way you can know everything and be able to do everything. So first and foremost, what are the areas that you think you could probably benefit from? Think of your own career trajectory, right? As a leader, if you want to go up in the ladder or you want to progress in your career or find more meaning in your work, then there must be other things to learn and other ways of enhancing your leadership skills. So consider what are those skills that you would like to learn. Then there are formal ways of learning it, going for courses, going for, like the University of Liverpool, but short-term courses and things like this. But there's also learning that comes from networking with other people. And that makes a huge difference. Today's is a world of information. There's so much information out there. There are TED Talks. So much of us academics put out research in palatable forms, short little things that you can listen to, like this podcast, for example. So there are lots of opportunities for learning. I think, especially in the inclusion space, there is so much knowledge out there that you've got to think about what you want to learn, but also what you can bring back into your workplace, because each workplace is different. So what might be an inclusion initiative that has been effective in one place may not work in your space. You know your business. So think about what could work, and then work with others, right? Work with those people you want to include. Ask them, what is it that we can do here to make things work better? You're not expected to have all the answers. So if you're looking for knowledge, if you're looking for that information, talk to the other people around you as well. So there's a couple of different ways, these are a couple of different ways to consider it.
And some really, really helpful tips there. Salma, that's been a real pleasure chatting about leadership. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot as well. So thank you for your insights. And hopefully leadership is in a good place for the future.
Inshallah, as we say. And I think there's a lot of joy in the learning. And I really, really hope that leaders take this as something that's really constructive and positive to do. I really have a lot of hope for the future, but I also think that there's so much yet to be done. And I'm looking forward to some wonderful, courageous leaders out there who are listening to this, who's going to pick up that mantle and run with it. Thank you so much for having me on, Hazel.
Thank you. That was the Management Matters podcast by the University of Liverpool Management School. Thanks again to our guest, Dr Salma Raheem. You can find out more about Salma's and our other research by visiting the Management School's website and connecting on social media. Thanks for listening.